We are live. Greetings to our audience in person and at home, and to all attending. My name is David Lepofsky, and I'm the chair of the Toronto District School Board Special Education Advisory Committee. This is our monthly meeting, which we do 10 times a year. We are here in person at 5050 Yonge Street in beautiful, not downtown Toronto, and we are also streaming live on the internet. Let me begin by welcoming everybody. We've got a great turnout in person and a great turnout online, and undoubtedly our greater turnout is thanks to our special guest, who we're going to introduce in a split second. Next to me, to my right, is Richard Carter, Vice Chair. And next to him is Rachel Chernos-Lynn, who is the chair of the Toronto District School Board. And Rachel, thank you for joining us. We're delighted you're able to come, and we're looking forward to having a lively discussion with you. I'd like to just briefly do a around the table introduction of who's here. If we could start to my left, and if you are staff as opposed to a member of SEAC, please identify that you are staff. We'll do that after.
Sorry, Leanne Dixon, I'm the SEAC liaison.
Leo Lagnado, and I'm representative for Autism Ontario. Good night.
Hello, I'm staff. My name is Effie Stathopoulos, and I'm one of the centrally assigned principals for special education and inclusion.
I'm Katia Palumbo, the centrally assigned principal, special education and inclusion.
Associate Director Luis Cerisco.
Hi, everyone. Nandy Palmer, System Superintendent for Special Education and Inclusion.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Angelica Bell, and I'm a student trustee for the Toronto District School Board.
Hello, Steve Lynette, representative for Epilepsy Toronto.
Aileen Chen, Community Living Toronto alternate rep.
Nora Green, Inclusion Action Ontario.
Good evening, everyone. Michelle Arts, and I'm one of the trustee members of the committee, sorry.
And my name is Rachel Chernos-Lynn, and I'm the trustee for Ward 11, and I also have the pleasure and privilege of serving as chair of the Toronto District School Board. And I haven't been here, I don't think, since before the pandemic. So it is really lovely to be back at SEAC, and thank you for having me.
And I'm Richard Carter with the Down Syndrome Association of Toronto, and as David noted, Vice Chair. So we've gone around the table. We also have a guest in the audience that maybe just visiting in the gallery, so that you can maybe introduce himself and what school they're associated with.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Landsberg, and I am chair of the Parent Council for Drury Secondary School. Thank you for allowing me to attend.
And we have our technical team in the corner.
Erin Powlett.
And a number of people online.
All right. Land acknowledgement. Richard.
For everybody that is able to stand, please do so while I read the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we reside on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, as well as the importance of establishing and maintaining cultural safety through learning from Indigenous people and perspectives. Thank you.
All right. We have an agenda proposed. Unless anybody has strong objections, can we approve the agenda? Can we have a motion?
Who wants to motion forward for the agenda as it stands? Do we have anybody that would like to motion the agenda? Thank you, Leo. Second? Nora. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, approved.
All right. Any conflicts of interest to be declared? Speak now or forever hold your conflict. None?
Unseen.
Let us proceed. Okay, just a brief couple of introductory remarks and then the first main item of the agenda. As I mentioned in the chair's report, We are going to be dealing with a couple of proposed working groups at the end of the meeting, just to let you know that's coming up. And just eager to make sure that people over the summer let Richard and me know. We're halfway through our mandate. If there's anything that you want to make sure we deal with in the second half of our mandate, it is really important that you let us know. Either write us or write the always helpful Leanne Dixon, and we will try to manage the last 6 meetings of the year so as to be as accommodating as we can. The first substantive issue on the table is a motion that I'm bringing forward for us to discuss. It's on a topic that we have discussed at this table quite a number of times, but I'll briefly summarize it for the benefit of newcomers or people watching online who are not familiar with this. We have raised at SEAC, our role at SEAC is to bring to the attention of the trustees and senior staff any major issues that are important to ensuring that the board effectively meets the needs of students with special education needs and to advocate for reforms where needed. We have identified one such major area through a number of avenues, and that is the difficulties that we as individual and association members, as ourselves as parents, have experienced over the years, system-wide, in finding out what exactly is available at TDSB for students with disabilities or special education needs, what services, what classes, what programs, what supports, what opportunities, and how to access them, where to go, who to ask, how to ask, what's on the menu, and how do I place my order. Now, that's not because anybody for a moment felt anybody wants to hold information back from us, and it's not because any individual is somehow trying to prevent it, but it's a big, huge organization, and these problems have been reported. SEAC first raised this by way of a comprehensive motion, believe it or not, 8 years ago this month. But we didn't see any reforms. SEAC conducted an extensive online survey of parents and got a ton of feedback. We've circulated that report previously. And what we heard is some people have had good experiences, but some people face a lot of these challenges. But most important, the kind of challenges that are reported are repeated over and over from a diverse range of sources. We've had discussions with staff, and we believe staff have made good faith efforts within their bandwidth to try to deal with it, but the problem remains, and so we're at the point where I believed it was important for SEAC to speak with one voice again, if we can, or a majority of SEAC, and to pass a motion directed to trustees with a clear and simple request. And I circulated it in my staff motion. I'm going to have Leanne read it out for benefit of those who don't have the print available in front of them, or for people at home in the audience. I circulated it last week to invite anyone on SEAC to share feedback if there were any wording that they wanted changed. We didn't receive any suggestions at all, which I'm hoping that means Richard and I were successful in our effort to capture what we felt to be the views that we've heard echoed at this table. In a nutshell, before I have Leanne read it out, the aim is to basically say we got a problem and we're asking the trustees to direct senior staff to both develop and implement a strategy to effectively inform families of this kind of information, and to let us and, of course, the trustees know what's being done over time. And the reason for taking this step is to work hand in hand with staff, if we're successful, to essentially get the board to increase the priority of this. I think that it needs a higher priority within the board overall. That no matter what priority the special education staff, all the way up to the associate director, see it requires, it needs a higher priority across the bigger board system. And that's the purpose. If we pass it, that will provide me the opportunity to ask to speak to the trustees, to make the case for this, and hopefully to get action taken on the basis of it. So Rachel, can I ask, or pardon me, Leanne, could you read it out? And then I'm going to ask if there's any discussion, and then on the basis of discussion, we can decide if you're prepared to vote.
Sure, David, do you want me to read all the whereases or just the
I think it
actual
would be
motion?
worthwhile for the benefit of people who
So I-
don't have the text.
Okay, I do have it on the screen as well. I did copy and paste it on the screen. Okay, so I'll start at the beginning. The right of parents, guardians, and students with disabilities, special education needs to know about TDSB program services and supports and how to access them. Whereas students with disabilities, special education needs, and their parents, guardians have a right to user-friendly access to important information about the program services, supports, and educational offerings available for them at TDSB and how to access them. This should be easy to find, written in plain language without education jargon, and available in multiple languages and multiple formats, including accessible formats. And whereas for over 8 years, SEAC has repeatedly told senior TDSB officials that too many families find it hard to find this information. They find this very frustrating. This undermines their ability to advocate for their child's needs. And whereas TDSB has told SEAC that it is the responsibility of each principal to convey this information to parents and guardians of students with special education needs, and that parents can look to the TDSB website, its special education plan posted there, and some brochures, yet SEAC has advised TDSB that this is not an effective solution. And whereas TDSB's 2024 multi-year strategic plan commits to treating parents as partners and to identifying, removing, and preventing systemic, procedural, and attitudinal barriers that stand in the way of equity of access and outcomes in education. SEAC therefore recommends that the TDSB board should, 1, direct TDSB staff as a priority to create and implement a strong, comprehensive action plan to fully, effectively, and proactively inform all parents, guardians, including parents, guardians of students with disabilities, special education needs, about the programs, supports, services, and educational offerings that could assist students with disabilities, special education needs, and where and how to access and advocate for them. And 2, direct TDSB staff to report by the end of 2024 and every 6 months after that to the board and to SEAC on their progress.
Let me just take one last moment before inviting discussion to explain one turn of phrase that may have caught your attention. You'll see that it asks for the plan to inform parents/guardians, including parents and guardians of students with disabilities/special education needs. That's quite on purpose. I want to make sure, and Richard and I want to make sure, and I'm proposing SEAC advocate to make sure, that this information be widely available to parents of students at TDSB, whether or not they have already been identified as having a special education need or a disability, whether or not the parents even know. It would be useful information to be provided to parents who may just see their child struggling at school and they don't know why. They need to have an entree into this information and without knowing all the jargon of special education. So that's why that wording's there. With that, I'm going to stop talking and ask for if there's any discussion or if there is a desire to proceed to a vote. And Richard will manage the discussion. I'm going to ask if we could keep it to 2 minutes a person, just because we have a lot we want to cover today.
Okay, I have on the speaker list, Michelle Arts. Nora?
Use your mic.
Thank you. On the speakers list, we have Trustee Arts, we have Nora, and myself at the moment in the room, and I'm looking online. I don't see anybody online with their hand up. If you do want to speak, please raise your hand through the reaction. Okay, Trustee Arts, if you'd like to go ahead.
My only comment is I would recommend just striking the part that says direct TDSB staff, because the board doesn't direct staff. Our only employees is the director. But it would be sufficient to say the board should, as a priority, create and implement a strong comprehensive plan. Because the board, that broader statement is more encompassing of both trustees and staff.
I don't have any trouble with that. Richard, are you good with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Unless anybody thinks we need to keep those words in, I'm quite happy. Leanne, you got that?
Sorry, Michelle, can you just repeat?
Just the part that says in 1 and 2 that says direct staff.
TDSB staff.
It's like, it would make the request, the recommendation more global to the board.
Board to just direct, should say that the board should establish
Yeah.
and implement. Does that work, Leanne?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nora, please.
I think we also need to make it clear that we're talking about the communication department helping with this and not the people who sit with us. So the special education staff are already up to their armpits with supporting students and families who are already experiencing ableism and discrimination in the school system. These are not the exhausted people who need to be doing this work. It needs to be the communication department that's helping with this, because I worry very much that we're diverting resources from the department that's already overrun to do administrative work when that's not what they were hired to help families and help schools help families. And so I think right now, when we're precariously providing inadequate service on the ground level to kids who are being excluded and families have no idea to stop that, the people who come to these meetings, the people who intervene in those cases, and this is about the communication department helping this and making it a priority beyond the special education department.
Okay, Leo?
Actually, I was going to say, I was going next.
Oh.
Leo, do you also want to? Okay, all right, perfect. I'll lower my hand and just thinking of a friendly amendment here, having heard Leanne as she read it mention the word students. It doesn't include students, and I would believe those that are of a certain age would be involved in this process. Can we somehow include that in there, David?
Sorry, what do you think?
To inform all parents, guardians, I want to say, and students, because where the students are involved in their special ed
Yeah, so
program.
just add the word "and students."
And students.
And do you see where that would go? To inform parents,
Oh, in
guardians.
the actual, okay.
And students, including parents,
Inform
guardians.
parents, guardians, students.
I don't know how we put in the other one with the,
You can just say,
it works.
Okay.
okay.
Perfect.
Can we put the communication department in?
The only thing I'm going to suggest to you is if Louise Risco has taught me anything, and she's taught me many things, it's to present this at a level of policy, and I will make that pitch in support of it, but I don't particularly see that SEAC would be telling them which staff to assign. Louise, did I learn? I'm trusting you're nodding your head.
I have strong feelings about that because I worry it'll fall on them and they won't care.
If I may, Chair
Sure.
Lepofsky, I appreciate Ms. Green's sentiments tremendously and her appreciation of how hard we work, and clearly we look very bedraggled. It is June, so thank you, Nora. Please know that our intention for this motion will be to collaborate strongly with our communication department, and the vision that we have in really looking at our website, which is being changed completely. So we're hoping once that happens, all of the ideas that SEAC has been discussing would be incorporated. So we won't be doing this at the detriment of our students. Thanks, Nora, for your care.
All right. Are we at a point where we can go to a vote?
Does anybody else online or anybody online have any comment or questions? I don't see any hands raised. Looking around the room, I do not see any further questions.
I've proposed the motion. I'm not sure I can because I'm the chair. I've tabled it. Does somebody want to move it?
Nora first. Do we have a seconder? Anybody online that wants a second? Anybody in the room?
There's a hand.
Leo second? Okay, so, oh, and I see Alana's hand popped up there, but I didn't catch it in time. So I'm going to say all in favor.
Could I just ask people online to do a hand raise as indicating in favor, please?
Leanne will be able to count those hands online. And we have 3 in the room at least. My hand's online, Leanne.
Your hand's online. David's hand is up. Sorry, 1, 2. 4, 6. And, sorry. Yes, that passes.
Motion passed.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to everyone. Let me move to our next agenda item. I'm going to give an extremely quick introduction, and we have a staff presentation. We have identified as one of our major priority areas what is available or what avenues are open to a family if they've asked for an accommodation, a support for their child. And the board has, one way or another, not provided it. They've either asked for it to be included in the IEP and the board in its judgment determined that it doesn't need to be. They've asked for the accommodation or support to be provided whether or not it's in the IEP, and the board decided no. And or the board has agreed to provide that accommodation or support in the IEP and has not delivered it. And we're talking about this relative to students who fall within the definition of an exceptional pupil under the Education Act, or who fall within the definition of disability under the Human Rights Code. We are not talking about appealing placements governed by an Identification and Placement Review Committee. We've been told that there are, in effect, 2 avenues. One is the Concerned Parents Protocol, and the other is the human rights, internal human rights process. So staff online will be briefing us on how they work. And just to help manage time for people to be able to ask questions and so on, what I'd mention is to staff is you don't need to describe to us how families are consulted on the IEP if you assume they have been, but an agreement has not been reached. What happens then? That would help. And just for everyone's knowledge, we will make time as possible for questions from you, and then we will have a broader discussion at a future meeting about whether we think any changes need to be made. So over to staff, and thank you for putting together a PowerPoint for us.
Thank you very much. And if I could just provide a bit of an opening, Chair Lepofsky, I know this item has been scheduled for 10 minutes. That is going to be a challenge. I have asked Nandy to go over very quickly in regards to the legislative requirements in reference to the legislation to IEPs, only because, Chair Lepofsky, as you have done, to making sure that we have a common understanding, particularly for those who are dialing in this evening, but I promise we'll be very, very brief.
Would it be possible to aim for 10 minutes for each of the 2 avenues? So 10 minutes on the Concerned Parents Protocol and 10 minutes on the human rights process?
Okay, thank you very much.
Would that work? Or
We'll
give
do
it a
our-
try, see what you
We
can
are
do.
going to do our very best for you, sir.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. So this evening, I'm joined by Krish Chakraborty, who is actually doing double duty as legal as well as people and culture, and Mahijab bin Ibrahim from the Human Rights Office. So we will begin, and Krish, if I can ask you to start with slide 2, please.
Thank you, Nandi, and good evening, everyone. We just want to give a very brief backdrop of IEPs under the Education Act, just to provide a framework for our presentation. So as we know, under the Education Act, the IEP must include the specific educational expectations for the pupil, an outline of special education programs and services to be provided, methods by which pupils' progress will be reviewed, and where the pupil is over 14 years of age, transition plan to post-secondary education. And it's very important to note that in developing the IEP, the principal shall consult with the parent and consider the IPRC and tribunal's recommendations. We very much know that it's the parents, guardians, caregivers know their child often much more than the TDSB does, than a school board does. So it's very, very important, and it's legislated that we do consult with parents each and every time an IEP is developed. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Krish. So I'll do this slide just in terms of a quick overview of how TDSB staff does consult with families with regards to IEP development. So the opportunity to consult with parents, guardians, caregivers, and the student as appropriate is offered at the beginning of the IEP development process, and also anytime the IEP is being updated or review. But that being said, any parent who would like to meet with school-based staff to discuss their child's IEP is able to make that request at any time. We also have communicated to staff that any parent, guardian, or caregiver or student input must be given due consideration as the IEP is being written. And we do try to include our students that who are younger than 16 years of age as well, as appropriate. If any agency personnel are working with the student, they may also, with parent permission, give input into the consultation process. So TDSB does have a consultation letter and a response form that is sent home within the first 2 weeks of school of a new school year, or within the first 2 weeks of a student's placement in a new program. And we have actually implemented that whereas the IEP, a copy of the IEP is stored in the student's Ontario Student Record or OSR, we have also asked for the parent consultation form to be attached to that IEP and also placed in the Ontario Student Record. A parent, guardian, or caregiver can indicate if they would like to meet and to discuss the consultation as opposed to completing the form. And so while the development of the IEP is a collaborative process, there are sometimes disagreements over what is written in an IEP, and that is what we're here tonight to talk about, what happens in that situation. Before I pass it back to Krish, I do want to share with you that we do follow the ministry's standards for program planning and implementation of IEPs, which states that although the IEP is developed collaboratively, the principal is ultimately responsible for each student's plan. The principal must sign the IEP to indicate their assurance that the plan is appropriate to the student's strengths and needs, and that it meets all of the standards outlined in the document that I just mentioned. So next slide, please, and back to you, Krish. Thanks.
Thank you, Nandi. And as Nandi mentioned, there's two types of situations where a parent might disagree, as I understand for the purposes of this conversation. One, if the parent disagrees with the final content of the IEP, meaning that something's not included that should be, or something's in there that shouldn't be in there, or some sort of amendment that might be required. Or two, if the contents of the IEP are not being implemented, what happens then? Well, the very first thing that I want to talk about is we do want to collaborate with parents, guardians, and caregivers. That's always the first avenue, collaboration with the parent. So the Ministry of Education has a document called Shared Solutions, a guide to preventing and resolving conflicts regarding programs and services for students with special education needs. This particular document speaks exactly to programs and services, and if there's a disagreement in the IEP between board and parents, how we can actually resolve that discrepancy, how can we resolve that solution through collaborative problem solving. So we always turn to that document first and try to collaborate with parents. However, if the parent still disagrees with what's in the IEP or whether and to what extent something's not included into the IEP and it's not being implemented, we've identified two particular avenues that a parent, guardian, or a caregiver can take in resolving that dispute. The first, as we were talking about earlier, is the Parent Concern Protocol. That's PR 505, and it's a public document on our website. And the second is the Workplace Harassment Prevention and Human Rights Procedure, PR 515. Again, a procedure on our public website. I just want to make one minor note as an aside. The parent, guardian, or the caregiver can always appeal to the Special Education Appeal Board, as well as the Ontario Special Education Tribunal, if they disagree with the IPRC, in particular, the identification or the placement of the student. We're not talking about IPRCs today. We're just specifically talking about the IEP and what happens if a parent disagrees with that. But I just wanted to make a note of that they're two separate processes. Next slide, please. So the Parent Concern Protocol is an elevator or hierarchy where you can escalate concerns to different staff members at the board. So the first point of contact is always the classroom teacher. It then escalates to the school principal, and then escalates to the superintendent or the executive superintendent of education, and then it can also go to a trustee. And the Parent Concern Protocol will actually talk about the responsibilities of each and every one of these employee groups, and we'll talk a little bit about that next. Next slide, please. So, parents, guardians, caregivers can bring a classroom concern to the principal of the school. And these are any of the steps that the principal can take when a parent, guardian, or caregiver does bring a classroom concern to the principal. They could advise the parent to discuss the matter with the teacher. They can gather more information. They can discuss the information with the teacher and advise and inform the parent of the outcome. They can meet jointly with the teacher and the parent to discuss the concern. They may consult with the superintendent of education, board staff, legal where required. They may refer to the concern to the superintendent of education if the parent doesn't agree. And the superintendent of education may consult with the parent and principal and render a final decision on the matter. Next slide, please. So what if a school concern is brought to the principal, separate and distinct from a classroom-specific concern? Well, again, you can contact the parent to discuss and resolve the concern. The principal may gather information, consult with the superintendent of education and board staff and legal, refer the matter for school council discussion and advice as appropriate. Again, we're talking about a school matter here. Refer the concern to the superintendent of education if a parent doesn't agree. And the superintendent of education can again consult with the parent and the principal and render the final decision. If the matter happens to be a policy or a program matter, the principal may refer the matter to the appropriate staff member who can answer the question. And that may include a central staff member as well. Next slide, please. Now, a parent, guardian, or a caregiver may also bring a school concern to the superintendent of education directly. If that happens, the superintendent may refer the matter back down to the principal if this hasn't yet taken place. Again, we're talking about the escalation here. They may gather information. They may consult with the principal and advise and recommend options and inform the parent of the outcome. They may make a final decision with consultation with the principal. They may even consult with the executive superintendent of education where appropriate. And if the concern is brought to a central manager, the manager takes action if it's in their area of expertise. If not, they will refer the concern back to the appropriate principal, superintendent of education, or staff. Next slide, please. Finally, if the school concern is brought to the director of education or the chair of the board, typically what the director or the chair of the board would do is they'd refer the matter back down to the superintendent of education, or if it's to the director, might send it to the trustee for attention. But essentially, it would go back to the superintendent of education or the principal of the school to deal with, and you'd go back through the parent concern protocol that way. Next slide, please. Just another mention to PR 505, the Parent Concern Protocol. It also includes guidelines for staff and how they're to interact and deal with the procedure. PR 505, guidelines for trustees and what actions the trustees can take, and guidelines for parents as well as to how they can navigate the process and the parent concern protocol to get their message through. So all of that is also included in PR 505, parent concern protocol. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Krish. Before we pass it on to Mahijabeen from the Human Rights Office, I do want to state that when a matter is referred back to the school superintendent, that the school superintendent works very closely with department staff. So whether that's special education and inclusion staff, caring and safe school staff, the program literacy early years staff, the school superintendent is coordinating all of the board personnel and board staff that needs to work alongside school-based staff to resolve the matter. Thank you. Mahijabeen, welcome.
Good evening. My name is Mahijabeen Ibrahim. I'm the System Lead for Human Rights. It's a pleasure to join you this evening. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Does my sound okay?
Yep.
Thank you so much. I get the privilege of talking about our human rights policy. The board has a comprehensive human rights policy that establishes the responsibility of staff, in particular, to protect, promote, and advance human rights so that all members of the TDSB community can learn, function, and work in environments that are equitable, accessible, respectful, and inclusive. Environments that are free from discrimination and harassment on the basis of protected grounds of discrimination specified in the board's human rights policy and protected by the Ontario Human Rights Code. To ensure that TDSB meets these positive human rights obligations, it is important to proactively identify, address, and prevent all forms of discrimination, including individual and systemic discrimination. And these are the commitments the board makes to uphold the rights of individuals, and specifically our students and students with special education needs. If I may have the next slide, please. Thank you. The human rights policy at the Toronto District School Board identifies 17 specific protected grounds based on which we are trying to ensure freedom from discrimination and harassment. The right to equality based on these 17 grounds and their intersecting identities is what we're trying to uphold and promote at all times. The right to equality also includes the duty to accommodate. The duty to accommodate is the legal obligation to make adjustments, provide supports and exceptions in order to avoid discrimination on the basis of the protected ground. As you can see on this list, disability is a protected ground. The definition that we use for disability is as defined in the Ontario Human Rights Code. It is a broad definition that really helps us advance the rights of persons with disabilities. To avoid discrimination on the basis of protected grounds, because we want to ensure fair and equitable access, treatment, and inclusion, and for individuals to be able to participate equally and perform to the best of their abilities in the learning environment at TDSB. When there is a duty to accommodate, the standard to which an accommodation must be sought and achieved is to the high threshold or the point of undue hardship. The law acknowledges, and so does the TDSB policy, that they may be hardship, but it is undue hardship. That is when we would have reached the limit of the duty to accommodate. The duty to accommodate is a very important obligation, and is embedded in the fabric of TDSB life to make sure that we are doing our best to understand the needs of code-protected individuals, in this case, the needs of students with special education needs, so that their needs are met. The procedural duty to accommodate also is important. That means it really calls on TDSB board staff, school staff, parents, guardians, caregivers, and students to work cooperatively, and Krish mentioned this earlier, and so did Nandi, to identify and address the needs that students have. This transparent, collaborative, and respectful process is what helps us meet the procedural obligation of the duty to accommodate. Thank you, and if I may have the next slide, please. While we establish these positive obligations and make sure that people understand their responsibilities. We also understand, sorry, if we could go to the next slide. Thank you so much. We also understand that there may be concerns or complaints of human rights violations. Student complaints about administrators, these are board staff, school staff, can be forwarded to the board's Human Rights Office. The parents, guardians, and caregivers may choose to directly approach the Human Rights Office to understand their options. In understanding the process, it is important that the Human Rights Office staff, because we realize there are many entry points, help parents, guardians, caregivers, and students understand the various pathways depending on the nature of their complaint or concern. In terms of not meeting duty to accommodate, the concern certainly will be redirected to the parent concern protocol if necessary. And those are the procedures 505 that Chris Chakrabarty just reviewed with you. If the complaint is against the person, the principal of the school themselves, who bears ultimate responsibility at the school, then certainly we would be dealing with that under our procedures 515, which is the Workplace Harassment Prevention and Human Rights Procedure. The Human Rights Office also has the ability to identify and address systemic complaints. And from time to time, for complex issues and depending on other factors, the Human Rights Office may engage the services of external investigators to assist with systemic concerns. So this is the pathway for student complaints about discrimination due to disability. If I may have the next slide, please. So in summation, complaints about administrators can be addressed both by those with supervisory responsibilities as described in procedures 505 or the parent concern protocol, or they may come directly or they may be addressed by the Human Rights Office. So those are our two pathways, the procedures 505 and procedures 515. In addition to facilitate the easy sharing of information and not having to have people repeat the information over and over again, the Human Rights Office has created a student complaint form. Parents, guardians, caregivers, and students may opt to choose to complete a student complaint form. This form just prompts in terms of the kinds of information that is necessary to address these complaints. At all times, parents, guardians, caregivers, students, and board staff can reach out directly to the Human Rights Office. A few ways to reach the Human Rights Office for those who prefer email. The email address is humanrightsoffice@tdsb.on.ca. For more information about the work of the Human Rights Office, easy access to policies, procedures, and current information is also available through our website, which is currently also being revamped, just like other board websites. Additional information about the complaints that the TDSB as Human Rights Office deals with are shared on an annual basis through our annual Human Rights Office reports. The Human Rights Office reports articulates information about complaints based on disability. And in addition, we also share information about incidents of racism, bias, and hate. As you know, sometimes people are subjected to negative behaviors because of their identity, including students with disabilities. And so this information is also tracked and reported for the purposes of understanding climate and culture and fostering a climate that is respectful, in which all students, and in particular, in this case, our students with special needs, can thrive. That is the information I had for you today. Thank you for your attention.
Okay,
Happy to take questions.
that was all fantastic. Nandy, anything in conclusion, or can we jump into some questions?
No, we're good to go. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you, and thank you for presenting in a very compact and effective way. I'm going to let you people raise hands. I want to first start with questions, and that may be as far as we get today with the time allotted, but I've got a couple, and so I'm going to ask first. So while I'm doing this, perhaps people who want to raise questions just get onto Richard's list. And I'm not sure which of you want to answer this, but I've got really a couple of questions. First is this. When I read the text of the PowerPoint that was circulated just moments before the meeting, so I may have read it wrong, I was unclear about something. If a parent has chosen, a parent's got a situation, they think their child should get a particular accommodation, and the principal and the school have said no, and they choose not to use the concerned parents protocol, but instead to submit a complaint to the Human Rights Office, simply saying the board didn't accommodate, here's what the accommodation is that I'm seeking. I say it's a violation of the human rights policy. I'm complaining. Now, here we're not getting into the merits. I'm not describing any facts. We're not getting into the merits or who's right. My question is this: will the Human Rights Office investigate it? Or are there times where the Human Rights Office would say, well, we think you should instead use the concerned parents protocol? That's my first question. And my second question is, if the Human Rights Office will investigate it, what are the steps you take, and what are typically, do you have any timelines that you prescribe for yourself of when or how long it'll take to deal with something?
Okay, thank you for the two questions. So Mahijabin, I will shift over to you for this, but just to repeat, if a parent wants something such as a particular accommodation, doesn't want to follow the parent concern protocol, but prefers to go straight to the Human Rights Office, will the Human Rights Office investigate or bounce it back to the parent concern protocol? And if the Human Rights Office does investigate, what steps are taken and what timelines? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I'll start with the first one in terms of if the principal is refusing to accommodate. If I heard that correctly, the principal says no to an accommodation that the parent has requested. In any complaint, just in terms of the entry for a complaint, there's some early information that we need to gather, and that's why the complaint form is really useful. It helps us establish what is really happening. So before we refer it, we do want to make sure that there is a path open. If there is an opportunity to resolve it at the school level, then it does make sense to go back to PR 505. But in this case, if the principal has said no or not going to be dealing with it, then of course we have to begin our work. Our work involves intake, and the intake form is important because it gives us it's sufficient information to do what we call a threshold assessment. The threshold assessment is the first part after the intake, which helps us understand whether on a prima facie basis we have sufficient information to find that if those set of circumstances are true, that it would be that threshold and we would have to investigate. So that's sort of the first step, is the intake, to gather enough information that may involve certain conversations with the parent and so on. The threshold assessment really helps us determine whether it's going to go forward or not, and we would let the person know after we've done sufficient data gathering, information gathering, to whether or not it met threshold. If it met threshold, then yes, it would follow down in terms of an investigation pathline. Our timelines are pretty generous, but that's sort of where we would go. Just want to backtrack a little bit first. So if I look back at if a principal said no, and I'll remind you about what Chris shared with us in 505, that principals do have the opportunity to consult with board staff. So if the principal can, if the parent says, well, would you talk to the principal? We would be happy to talk if we wanted to understand better, especially if it's met threshold and saying, why is this looks like a human rights violation. Why is this not being addressed? To try to understand what's happening. But we do try to encourage that resolution. So let's assume that it passed threshold. A principal refused to deal with it. We did intake. It met threshold. It passed threshold. Then it would be investigated, and there would be a written finding or report. Give me one moment to get to that timeline.
you want to find it after and send it on to us, I'm happy to do
Sure.
that. Why don't we do that? I've got other questions, but I don't want to monopolize this. Richard, over to you.
Okay, so thank you. I'm next on the list, and I have two questions, basically, to staff. On the IEP document, if my recollection serves me correctly, there was a small, tiny box for parents to provide input. And I recall one time a parent wrote outside the box, made some marks on the IEP form, and they were informed by the principal that they had defaced a provincially mandated document, and this was obviously a very severe thing in the parent's eyes, hearing this from the principal. What I'd like to know, does the IEP form have any mechanism to document that the parents' comments are attached, and then they can attach whatever amount of paper they want to that document, as opposed to putting it in the box? But the key thing here is that when somebody picks up the IEP, if that attachment isn't there, is there some way that the IEP form would document that form's part of the IEP if the principal agrees with it or not? I'll ask that question first before I ask my second question.
Thanks for the question. And the answer is yes, because not all parents choose to write their response on the IEP parent consultation form itself. Or a parent might say, I'd like a meeting, and so the teacher or the administrator would document either directly on the form with the specific questions or otherwise, and that would be attached to the IEP and placed in the OSR.
So would it be fair to say there is no, being it is a form, there's no checkbox that says see attached parent comments? Is there any way that could be added so that it's very clear there is parent comments that go with that document?
So we've actually last year put it in the special education plan, screenshots of exactly the IEP template as well as the parent consultation form. And it says right at the bottom, copy to OSR, just like we would to everything else. But we could definitely check that out, Richard, and I have no issues putting that directly on the form.
Okay, great, thank you. And the second question, when it comes to the parent concern protocol, the steps, there was a list of people on that slide that should be approached or could be approached. Is there anywhere the parents are informed? Obviously, they know who their child's teacher is, they know who the principal is, the school is. Do they know, or do they have a document, and when do they receive it that shows who the other staff are that they would be potentially contacting as part of the parent concern protocol, not by title, but by physical name, so they're not having to basically deep dive the website to try and figure out who is, you know, their contact for their child? Are parents given that information up front?
So I can't speak to the specific practice of every individual school, but I do know for a fact that when principals send out their blogs or newsletters, on it has the name of the principal, the name of the superintendent, and as well, if you Google any TDSB school, on that school's website lists the name of the trustee, the name of the principal, the name of the superintendent as well.
So it's not actually given to parents up front, like providing them that information in their hands, like your child is in this class and here are all the key contacts?
I'm not sure if it goes as far as the superintendent, trustee, executive superintendent, Richard, but certainly they would get a list of school-based staff.
Thank you. The next one on the list is Nora, and then we have a couple online. We have.
Okay, give me the total number of people we've got.
Thanks. I guess I have 3 questions. So my question about the
Okay,
parent.
I'm going to just ask if we could do 2 minutes each for our.
Okay, David, I'm noting that you're doing that every time I'm talking.
If you can, as best you can.
So my parent concern protocol question is, it's when I look on the website, there's no reference to special education on the parent concern protocol. You have no idea that so just one second, you have no idea that sort of relates to special education. So there's lots of examples of what you would contact your teacher about, what you would contact your principal about, what you would contact your SO about. None of it refers to special education. And yet there are huge, extensive processes about, and staff associated. So I think for me, how do parents know to apply the parent concern protocol to special education issues when they see so many more additional staff? And that's just one of my questions.
Thank you, through the chair. The school principal and the school superintendent would be the primary contact for any concern, whether that is special education, whether that is grade placement, marks, a wide array of concerns, and the superintendent would then connect with special education staff, human rights staff, legal staff, in order to support resolution to the variety of concerns I mentioned.
I think it'd be helpful if you gave examples, so like about an IEP, about a whatever, and you actually cited, like, as the examples that are given in the student concern protocol, there's nothing about special ed.
Understood, thank you.
And then the second one is sort of two questions about human rights. So it's been my experience in having conversations that disability isn't listed as a historically marginalized or oppressed group. I haven't heard anything about the history of the fact that the last asylum in this province closed in 2009. I haven't heard anything about the fact that this country had forced sterilization for people with intellectual disabilities in its history. I haven't heard any of that kind of stuff. So I guess I don't see disability equity work woven in our equity work. So my question is, how would parents ever think to call the Human Rights Office? And mostly I want people to imagine a parent who has multiple identities that face oppression. I want you to put them in a shelter because potentially they're unhoused. And I want people to think about them actually implementing anything we just said tonight and think if that's a reality, that they would do that when their child with a disability comes to the door and is told there's no supports here.
Thank you. And through the chair, I think those are fantastic points for us as a staff to be making sure that our language is always inclusive when we're referencing equity and human rights work. So thank you.
All right, we're going to add Steve to the list and then close the list.
So next one is Beth.
Tell the sequence of the list.
Yeah, hi, thank you. And thank you, Nora, for bringing up those points. They're really extremely important. And my question is very simple, our CADAC question. Richard, I think you mentioned having seen the PowerPoint. We don't have the PowerPoint that was shared tonight about this presentation. So it would be really, really helpful if we could have access to that, because it's really helpful information that you're sharing.
Leanne has noted that.
And I'm going to ask that it be posted on our website as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay, Tracy.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. And I guess just to continue a little bit about what Nora said, I'm a little concerned when I'm hearing there's no timelines. And I just wanted some feedback on a situation that Community Living Toronto is hearing from many families over the past school year. The situation is for those students entering, even and upon registration, even before they start JK, many parents are being informed that unfortunately there's no support to provide toilet training. And parents are being asked to give up their employment, to come into schools, to actually change their children if they've soiled their diapers. And if they're unable to do that at risk of losing their employment, they're finding that their children, because principals have been told that there's no support staff in the schools to provide that assistance, have actually been left in soiled diapers in unhealthy conditions and are experiencing visits to now the doctors. So I just want to make sure I'm hearing correctly, because we know the parent concern protocol very well. I want to make sure that, that you're suggesting that this is a human rights issue and discriminating against students with disabilities who may not be toilet trained.
Thanks for the comment and question, Tracy. So very disappointing to hear that experience by a family or families, because it does not align with TDSB values. Students who are not toilet trained, we do have staff who are able to do toileting. And as we know, DECEs as well outside of special education staffing are able to do toileting as well for kindergartners, because we have kindergartners who may not have special education needs but may not be toilet trained. So we would ask that a family that's encountering this to, again, as per the parent concern protocol, connect with the principal of the school. And again, because everything is dealt with on a case-by-case basis, if they do go to the Human Rights Office, the Human Rights Office, as Mahijabin said earlier, may actually decide based on their own threshold assessment to investigate or refer it back to the principal and superintendent of the school.
And final questions?
Steve.
Thank you. Just a quick comment about what Nora had said. Even neurotypical, quote unquote, parents would have a difficult time addressing the human rights issues, especially if their children have complex disabilities, medical needs, multiple challenges. Life is hard. It's very hard. So having something that would help parents recognize how to go about that might be a good idea. And also, I think the board should consider a dedicated webmaster just for special ed issues within the communications department. One or two people that's their whole focus, that's their whole lens of solutions, looking for how does special ed fit in with the myriad of stuff on the board's sites, because it is often the orphan child left off to the side and yeah, we'll just throw some stuff there. It's improved greatly over the years, but it still isn't integrated, and I think it really should be. Thank you.
I think that fits in part with this and fits in part with the motion we passed earlier, and either way it fits. Because we have the chair of the board and another major discussion to start, I'm going to wind up this part of our discussion, but let me make the following two things very clear. Number one, we're not done with this topic. I'm planning on putting it on our September agenda, where we can discuss what, if anything, we think about this regime, whether we think parents need more, and what we might want to recommend. And depending how that goes, and if there's need, I'd welcome the chance to invite our guests back. I want to thank them both for their thorough but compact presentations on this. You're welcome to stay online for the rest of the meeting, and if you've got other things to do, I totally understand. And Leo, if you've got a question, I think we unfortunately couldn't get to it, but if you want to email it to Leanne, I'm going to ask that it be forwarded on so you can get an answer. So I want to make sure that that's not lost in the process. All right, so thank you very much. This has been a really good but a really important discussion, and it's opening a door that we will be exploring further. I myself am thinking of things that I've seen at the board that, had I thought of it before, it would have been a worthwhile thing to bring to the attention of the Human Rights Office, and I think we might want to be letting people know about that avenue more readily among our association members and others. Next, we have a wonderful opportunity now to hear from the chair of the Toronto District School Board. Rachel and I met for lunch a couple of weeks ago and had a fantastic conversation. She is eager to hear from you, and so she's not going to be making, I invited her to give a couple of quick introductory remarks, and what I really want to do is afford everyone here in person or virtually an opportunity to give feedback or ask questions as you wish, and if she can answer them, she will. If she can't, staff will note them, and they'll try to get back to you. But this is a chance for us to have a discussion directly with the chair of the board, and that is a fantastic opportunity. So, Rachel, thank you for taking the time. And please introduce yourself to everyone.
So, as I mentioned at the outset of the meeting, my name is Rachel Chernis-Lynn. I am the chair of the board. I've been chair since the fall of 2022. So I'm midway through my second year as chair. I would like to note that Trustee Anush Kandaraja looks like she's just joined recently. So we've got lots of trustees in the room. It's great. We've got Trustee Arts, of course, who's always here, and now we've got another one. So my ward is Don Valley West, and I have 24 schools in my ward. And one of the things that's unusual about my ward, and something I think is really special about my ward, is that I have two congregated sites in Ward 11. I have Park Lane, which is a school it's actually quite unusual. It's a school for students with complex medical and behavioral special education needs from kindergarten all the way to 21. So it's unusual to have that wide an age range. And then I also have Sunnyview Junior and Senior Public School. So that one goes from kindergarten to grade 8. And they are really interesting buildings and interesting schools. One was built specifically for students with complex medical needs. That's Sunnyview. Park Lane was not, and you really notice the difference when you go into them. They're unusual in the sense that most trustees don't necessarily have one of these schools in their riding. So last year, I had the pleasure of arranging a field trip for my colleagues, and so many of them came to visit Sunnyview, and we had a great day there learning about the school and seeing it. It has a therapy pool in it. It's a really unusual place. So that is something that I spend a lot of time in those two schools. I also have a number of ISP classes in my ward, as well as gifted classes. So something that I've learned a fair bit about over the years and watched as we've started to do more and more inclusion, integrating the ISP classes more into regular programs in my schools. And also seeing many of my other schools coming into the congregated sites doing different work with students. So we're starting to see integration even in our congregated sites in different ways. So lots of really interesting things in my ward that I love about Don Valley West. And also as chair of the board, I've had the opportunity to see a little bit more perhaps than some of my colleagues, because I get to go to visit a lot of different schools. So learning, that's part of the job description, I guess you'd say. But what I haven't had a chance to do in detail is sit on SEAC. So I was here many years ago for at least one meeting, maybe two, but it's been a long time. And so what I'm really looking forward tonight is to hearing from you guys. I had a lovely discussion with David over lunch, as he said, and we talked about a wide range of topics, but I see this really as an opportunity to have kind of casual conversation with the rest of SEAC and hear what's on your mind and learn from everyone in the room, both virtual and physically in the boardroom tonight. So I think that's enough about me.
Well, thank you. And what I'm going to do is invite people to raise your physical hand or virtual hand. Richard will start taking a list, and think of it as an opportunity to just give feedback. If there are issues that are on your mind that you just want the chair to take away and be alive to, not that she's going to be able to single-handedly change it overnight, but be alive that it's on your minds, that is a tremendous use of this. And for that purpose, I gave you the heads up that I had a question when we talked this afternoon. So here it goes. When you're the chair of the board that's got 250,000 students, it's not likely that you're going to make a lot of decisions about individual students, but you will get big decisions that could affect lots of students. And a huge and important decision has now been served up to the board and to you as chair because the current director of education, Colleen Russell-Rollins, has announced her intention to retire, and therefore a search is going to now be underway for a new director of education who's functionally the CEO of Canada's largest school board. And regarding that search, I invited you, or I'm going to invite you, to consider how and what steps might be taken to make a priority in the selection of the next director of education. Expertise in making reforms to advance the needs of students with disabilities and special education needs. There are always times that lots of groups of students need particular focus, but we know that a new director gets hired every, I'm going to make up numbers, 5 or 6 years, and then they have a tenure during which major changes can be made. When the current director was hired and when her appointment was announced, a clear priority was identified for her, and one on which she did focused work, and which has been congratulated in the announcement of her resignation in the area of racialized students. And that's a huge, important area. It was before, it is now, and it's going to need continued and more attention after. But it's important as well, I believe, that the next director of Canada's largest school board have specialized expertise and priority in their own minds before they walk in the door, addressing the needs of over 40,000 students with special education needs who are known, and the number of more of them who aren't. And so I'm wondering what might be possible in the selection process. I flagged this for her earlier. Or what options might you have for building that into the thinking in the recruitment process so that it does become a working criterion, among others?
So, to the chair, I think it's a great question and something that the committee will certainly have to consider deeply in terms of what are the priorities we're looking for in a new director. So we haven't set those yet. In fact, we're aiming to have the first meeting of the Director's Search Committee possibly this week. I know they were trying to get quorum this afternoon for a quick meeting just to establish a chair of that committee. After that, the committee members have been chosen, but they haven't chosen a chair yet. After that, the committee will start to begin meetings to determine a variety of things, such as, are they going to hire an interim? Are they going to hire a permanent director? What's the process for that? And eventually they'll get to a place where they'll be looking for what are the priorities we're looking for in a new director. That will be one of the things that committee will establish. And when I think back to the last process, one of the things that the committee determined was that it would be important to hear from community advisory committees and our statutory committees, and maybe even the public. I think we did do public consultations on it, if I remember correctly. And that might be a route that the committee will choose again. I imagine they will be looking for some form of consultation, particularly with, at minimum, I would imagine, again, the community advisory committees and our 2 statutory committees. I can't imagine that wouldn't be something that they would think about. I think it's certainly, it would, I can't imagine it wouldn't be one of the priorities we would be looking at, given the multi-year strategic plan, which has placed a big emphasis on special education, inclusion, accessibility. So given the fact that the director's main job is to carry out the multi-year strategic plan, which we've just passed, and that is a key component of it, I think it's a reasonable assessment that we would be looking to SEAC for some input on what those particular qualities would be, and it would be a key piece of any director search, I would imagine, or as one of the priorities. In terms of specific candidates, I don't believe that there would ever be an opportunity for community advisory committees or standing committees to weigh in on that piece of thing. And I just want, you probably know this, but just so that the committee is aware, when you're dealing with human resource issues, that those are always highly confidential. So there wouldn't be that kind of input, but I would think the fact that this is key to the multi-year strategic plan, and I do believe the board has a very strong commitment to community consultation, and as well as consulting with CACs and standing or statutory committees. I think it's a kind of a given that we would be looking to hear from SEAC on that.
That's great. Thank you very much. And now, Richard, over to you.
Okay, the next person on the list will be Leo.
How many we got on the list?
We have Leo, Nora, myself, and I don't see any others in the room or others online.
All right. Not yet. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So Leo for Autism Ontario. Good evening, Madam Chair, and thank you for attending our meeting. We're very, very pleased to have you here as it shows your commitment to our community, and we deeply appreciate your ongoing commitment to enhancing the educational experience for all students. And also, thanks for your opening statement mentioning the ISP programs. Autism Ontario strongly believes that all students on the autism spectrum must have access to a range of placement options based on individualized student needs, regardless of geographical location, from full inclusion to self-contained in all school boards. So that is actually very positive. Thank you. Now, moving on to a priority issue for Autism Ontario, which has been raised by many, many parents in our community, which is quite large, and indeed by many of the other associations represented here. We have been receiving many parental reports that are pointing to frequent use of formal and informal exclusions for students within the TDSB, including partial exclusions like shortened school days, informal requests for voluntary withdrawals, or which often occur even without appropriate accommodations or parental consent. It ends up disrupting students' educations and well-being and violates their right to a full and continuous education as mandated by the Education Act. It is also morally unjustifiable, as I'm sure we all can agree, but I understand that the board does not collect sufficient data on that. My point here is that we would like to work collaboratively with you, the board and staff, to prevent the use of exclusions as a substitute for proper support and accommodations. So given your role and dedication to our students, my question is if we can have you commit to prioritizing this issue just as we have. And thank you for coming today and allowing me to share with you one of our greatest concerns.
So, I mean, I think one of the challenges for the Board of Trustees is that part of what you describe is very operational. Like those are decisions around, when schools call home. Those are not decisions that involve trustees. They're really operational based on what's happening on a day-to-day basis in schools. I think there's a recognition that, or at least I have a feeling that, and maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but we have a commitment that we've made to supporting inclusion, but we're not always successful in how we do that. And whether it's an issue of not always having enough resources or enough learning, or how that all works together, it's a place we need to do better. And I do believe that is a focus, not just for the Board of Trustees, but I think for staff in the coming years of how to really make sure that we're as successful as possible in that commitment, and to how we do that to make sure that we're doing it to the absolute best ability that we can. In a time of scarcity, it's a challenge, and that is unfortunately where we've been for several years. And the news, we're in budget season as we speak, so that's always one of the challenges as we look at our finances and we think, or at least I certainly think to myself often, like, if we had more money, where would we put it? And I tend to think we need more resources, particularly in K-3, because I think we're probably not as successful as we would like to be in carrying out those goals that we've set. So I think there's challenges that we have with that. I don't know, I'll be the first to admit, I don't know probably enough about the issue of exclusion. I'm not an expert in it. That's definitely not something, I think Trustee Arts probably knows a lot more about that, having sat on SEAC for so many years. So I don't pretend to know as much about it. And we have our spec ed staff who may also wish to comment on that. But I think it's a great question. It's something that certainly the public's concerned about. We know a lot of parents are concerned about it. The media is aware of it. Like, it is definitely something that everybody is aware of, and a challenge that I know we need to work towards rectifying as best as we can.
Okay, Nora.
I don't know if does staff wish to add anything?
Thank you very much through the chair. Just to say, Leo knows this is an absolutely shared goal for us, and through Superintendent Palmer's leadership, we're one of the very few boards who actually collects data on modified days, and our principals have to update that regularly, where I'm going to call it the space in between, where we know a modified day is being used and we may not be aware, and working with our community partners, seeking permission from that parent who's contacted Leo, say, to share the name in the school so that we can really act as problem solvers for that child. So thanks, Leo, for raising that important issue.
Nora?
Nora Green.
Thank you. Thank you again for coming tonight. And I know it's a lot of faces. So I represent Inclusion Action in Ontario, which is actually an organization that supports family who feel that the best place for their child's education is in their community. And so I guess I just wanted to comment on the fact that sometimes when we talk about congregated sites and ISPs, we forget the vast majority of students with disabilities are in regular classes and in their local community. And those students too often experience difficulty accessing their accommodations or having their needs met, as well as kids who are being served in higher support environments. And I think while Leo's talked about specifically about Autism Ontario's stance about congregated sites and ISP classes, I think it's also important to realize that sometimes the persecution that happens in a regular class when you have a disability causes a family to feel that that is their sole recourse, is to go and look for another place and to be educated elsewhere. And I think it's also important to understand that there is a ton of education research that says one of the biggest indicators for successful inclusion is teacher attitude. So while I agree that funding is a huge part, I'm not saying that that's not true, and I appreciate that, but the attitudinal barriers of where kids should be served and what a kid should look like and what a building should be like, and are we preparing our buildings for all of our kids to be in their local school? We're not really talking about that. So, and I think for me, I would echo Leo's concerns and Tracy's also about the kids not gaining access. Somehow our equity work has gone really awry when our associations are now experiencing increased exclusion under equity work. So I have a difficult time hearing the word even in the board. And I understand it maybe now being embedded into multi-year strategic plans. But when we're saying it while simultaneously experiencing increased calls about not gaining access, something's really awry, because it means staff don't see that kids with disabilities have a right to be in their schools. And, you know, back to that history piece where I said I don't know how much history everybody's gotten. Some kids in the system only gained access to education, the right to come to school, in 1980. So not knowing those things, not understanding they're marginalized, not understanding that they're a population that has historically faced a lot of oppression, in some times in history, extermination in parts of the world, means that people don't really fully understand the rights associated with disability. And I feel I would be remiss in saying that I felt like the board was doing an adequate job at conveying that message, because there's no way, to your point, operationally, you can manage 600 schools and their attitudes of people at 600 schools. So if it's not part of that work, and it's not that woman or person I talked about who has all those identities facing oppression and is unhoused, they are never coming to the Human Rights Office and telling somebody, particularly if they've come from a country where their child may have actually legitimately been denied access to school and been referred to as a burden. So for me, I just wanted you to be aware that that's kind of what we're experiencing. And I know the department works hard to try and address it, but there's some disconnect. And I feel like trustees need to be aware that our kids aren't doing well. Like the EQAO results, we underperform the province. How is that happening? What are other people doing better than we are? Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that, Nora. That's, the Human Rights Office should be, while we want people to I take your comments on how we need to make it more accessible. I mean, absolutely, but we don't want to ultimately even end up in a place where families are having to go to the Human Rights Office, right? We want to prevent that by being successful in having kids be welcomed and be thriving in their home schools as much as possible in regular classrooms. That's the gold standard, right, of what inclusion means. So I hear you, and I know we do have to do better, and part of that is through education and socializing the normalcy of all of this as well. So I take your feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm next on the list with two questions. I'll ask my first question and then follow up with a second before we can have a discussion on that. First one is, what can SEAC do better to help the Board of Trustees do their job to support the students? But my other question is, we talk of inclusion. You mentioned how homeschool, regular classroom is where you start, or where you should start when you first register at the school. That should be your first placement. And then we figure out from there what additional supports you need. But we throw the word inclusion in there, and that almost makes it sound like you're over here, and how do we bring you into the regular class and into the regular school? It seems like we're looking at it from the wrong angle. At least that's how I perceive it when I hear inclusion. It should really be, you're in there already, you're included. How do we serve you better? How does the school system support those students? So I leave that question there, but how can SEAC do a better job to help the Board of Trustees?
Well, I actually think we've had a lot of good input from SEAC in recent years, and I think it's getting stronger and stronger. I think SEAC has different routes. You have staff that are in the room that can help you with operational pieces, and there certainly are many things that changes that you want, feedback that you're giving staff that are really operational, and those aren't meant to be brought to the trustees, because then you bring them to us and we say, well, that's operational, we can't really do that, and then you're frustrated because you're like, so from my perspective, you have staff in the room, so you've got this opportunity to provide them with pieces that are, where you're looking for help operationally. When it comes to policy pieces, that's ideally what should come to trustees, because that's the realm where we can make decisions that actually have a difference for you, right? I would say the other place is budget, obviously, to provide feedback to us on what's important to you in terms of budget. And I know one of the pieces that Nora brought up earlier was making our schools accessible. And I don't just mean, like, in order to have truly inclusive spaces, we need the buildings to be accessible. And of course, that was originally supposed to happen by 2025. We've written a number of letters to the province around that. We haven't really had much action on it, but we do try, as we're renovating buildings and doing different, these are pieces that are on trustees' minds and on staff's minds. So there's advocacy that you can do around that. You have the ability to write the ministry as well. I think you can work in tandem with the Board of Trustees and then also doing advocacy to the government in your own right, and sometimes together with other SEACs. I think that actually could help us if you're doing that outreach and we're mimicking some of that outreach. I think it's a way that we can all work effectively together. I think when it comes from all of us sort of triangulating at different ways, we may be more effective. We're more likely to be more effective. So I think that collaboration is particularly important, and that we can do not just in our board to the ministry, but in our board to the Ontario Public School Boards Association, and share the kind of things that that our SEAC is bringing to us, we can share with our boards. And the more that message gets out, the stronger it can be. So I think there's opportunities there that maybe we haven't effectively used enough. One area that I think we did use pretty effectively was SIP funding last year. And I know that's something that some SEACs had written about to the province. We wrote to the province. We've gotten some traction on that. That's made a difference in our bottom line for sure. So that's something where I think staff and SEAC was working effectively, but also that was happening at kind of higher levels as well. So that's an opportunity. And I think anytime if you're able to bring us motions, and if you ever want feedback on them, you're always welcome to come to us first to sort of get a sense of, is this the kind of thing trustees would support? I know you have a resource here with Michelle who does give you feedback, and great feedback. Like today, that was a key piece to provide you with information that we're not allowed to direct staff. That was kind of a good nugget, because we would have gotten that motion and we would have said, well, we can't do that. What can we do? We might have said, what can we do? Or we might have sent it back to you. I don't know what the committee would have done, but you have a trustee resource. So I think that's key. But I would just say, when you think of policy pieces, that's for us. Operational, that's for staff. But I think probably the biggest, one of the big pieces, if there's advocacy to be done, it's working collaboratively together through your powers as well as ours, because you have different abilities than we have. So if we all work together on it, we'll get to the right place, hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, and then we have Tracy, and then Amy.
Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. I also appreciate the fact that you just said we can work together. In the years that I've been on SEAC and during my times as chair, the biggest thing I have always advocated for is cooperation between SEAC, the Board of Trustees, and staff. It has not always been easy. Historically, SEAC has been considered a committee of, what do they want, and had been ignored by the board for many, many years. And it's changed, and it continues to change. We are getting better responses. We are getting better responses and support from staff and trustees. That we are actually being listened to with respect to some of the motions and topics that we bring up, which is truly appreciated. One thing I've noticed over the last 4 years is the pandemic has caused an extraordinary amount of stress with everyone in every aspect of their lives. And you add schooling and special needs children to a family, and it's almost unmanageable. Parents have to consider quitting their jobs sometimes to support their students, or severely modifying their work life to support their students. In fact, they still do it. I'm one of them. I think what would help going forward for all of us is the Board of Trustees to adopt, along with staff, along with SEAC, along with every person in the board, a philosophical approach of compassion and understanding. Inclusion, as Richard said, implies that you're out there and we're over here, and we're going to include you. It also requires an understanding with every principal in every school that whether or not your school is physically accessible, philosophically and compassionately and humanely, it should be. And just with the frame of mind, things will get better. But when principals say, no, we can't do that, or when they say, you must come pick up your child, they're saying, we don't support special ed. I think it's also important for the board to recognize that special ed students are not the 50,000 that are represented with IEPs. They are the 250,000 students in the board. There are probably twice as many that do not have IEPs or IPRCs that have behavioral, developmental, physical, cognitive, emotional challenges that are just going to school. The middle schools are probably the worst place for students to go through that with, because there's an understanding that, well, you're in middle school now, so grow up and get ready for high school. And we're going to teach you how to do that. When, in my opinion, the philosophy should be, you're in middle school going through the most difficult physical and mental changes in your life. We're here to help you. You'll get to high school with our support. That doesn't always exist. So I think that if we understand that the parents and the caregivers of any student in the board often have a lot of answers regarding the best approach for managing a student's challenges, whether they break down, freak out, go off the deep end, they should be relied on and they should be listened to. And I bring that up because I don't know if everyone here is aware of an incident that happened in Hastings County about 3 weeks ago. A high school student with a very severe seizure disorder was told by staff at that school exactly what their son needed, what his issues were, how he would respond to certain situations, and that he should not, under any circumstance, be left alone. He was put into a quote-unquote quiet room. He had a seizure and he died, which is beyond comprehension for any parent who has a child with a seizure disorder. Epilepsy is probably the only disorder here that someone can literally die from. You can have a seizure and die, whether it's a physical injury afterwards or it's because your seizure doesn't stop. For that parent to have been ignored, for those kinds of things to have happened, it's unimaginable what they went through, and it's unimaginable how someone could disregard what the parent had to say. So what I would really appreciate in the spirit of working together is that all trustees understand that SEAC is not just a special ed committee to support those kids that used to be sent on the special bus. Those kids are everywhere, and they can be included in every school. They should be included in their neighborhood school with the proper understanding. I know it's going to take time because the pandemic has made people very stressed and has changed behaviors, but I'm hoping that with your support, that things can get back to that with an overall direction that it's important we understand our students, in spite of all the challenges with staffing, and believe me, I understand that. But just, step back, recognize that these kids are kids. These students are students, and that's what we're here to do. That's
Stephen,
all.
thank you, Stephen. I'm mindful of time, and we've got Eileen who wanted to say something. Eileen, can you do it fast? Because I've got a couple of other agenda things we got to get to.
I'm done, thanks.
Thanks, Steve, and more on that later. Eileen, can you do it in a minute?
I would try in a minute. I'm
That'd be
going to
great.
give it a quick shot. So thank you through you, David, and also together with Richard. I'm so excited to be here today because I know that I actually attended Trustee Chernos Lynn's ward meetings before. So, and I actually visited Park Lane, and then through her guidance actually and support me to speak about and advocate from my own lens. And I did. And I actually was at Holland Blueview today. That was one of the partners we were hoping to build a student because they have a patient-centered approach. So I wanted to learn from them and be able to bring in a student-centered approach. I know that we spoke about that, but I wanted to see what it's like when those merge. And then I'm sure you're aware that the project search is very successful there. And I've seen actually one student came back, gave me a hug, and he's hired by the foundation, and that's through Jury. That's the school where my son graduated, and he's a senior of my son. And at that time, that was the last year they were able to have OSSC. They were able to have credit courses to be able to, I believe he has English, and I have it right out here, math, science, and be able to have that understanding, but it's true commitment through the teachers to bring them there. And the reason that I brought back OSSC, because I'm actually connected with the World of Work as well, and I can see a lot of apprenticeship jobs that require that folks may not be going to universities and typical education as post-secondary. There are options, and I know because our board has the expertise in that. I've seen it today. So how about bringing back that approach? And I know sometimes it may seem a lot of work, a lot of people, but if we gather through parents and through student-centered approach together, that sometimes when we connect in one meeting instead of talking to 10 meetings, if we have that, I think budget-wise, I think that makes sense. So I'm trying to learn, and I saw how wonderful it is to have that individual gave me a hug and tell me now I'm working for the foundation. So that's, I want to report back, and I want to thank you.
Eileen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to, Rachel, I hope we will have more opportunities to have you come and join us. Any last words you want to wrap up with before we move on to just a couple of other rapid pieces of business, because I want to get everybody out of here by 9 if I can.
I think what I've heard tonight, correct me if I'm wrong, is parents as partners, which is a key piece in our multi-year strategic plan. Making sure we're truly doing inclusion to the best of our ability, and really starting with inclusion as opposed to bringing you in from the outside, but starting from a place of belonging from the get-go. And the other piece I've really heard is collaboration, and that making sure that we're hearing all voices and listening. And the more we all put our heads together, the better we'll do. So lots of other pieces that have come in here and there. But I think what I'm hearing around this table is very much what I hear around the Board of Trustees table as well when we talk about these kind of issues. I will just say that I think all of us are aware of what happened in Prince Edward County, Prince Edward and Hastings County, and it was it's devastating to hear. And that is a position, we never, ever want to find ourselves in. And that those partnership pieces and collaborating with parents parents know their kids best, what we need to be doing. And it's a terrible, tragic incident. I can't comment on the specifics because I don't really know exactly what happened, but I just know that our hearts certainly go out to that family, and you know, there's not much you can say to make those kind of things right. So with that, I think there's been a lot of really valuable insight from so many different perspectives around this room, and we'll continue to listen and learn from each other. And I know Trustee Arts will continue to bring the concerns around this table to us around the board as well.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to take you up on your suggestion that we find a way to get our voice heard by the committee when it sets its the search committee as it goes through its priority setting. Let me just go through, Nandy, I've not forgotten your staff report. I'm going to do a couple of things lightning fast to maximize the time available for you. With respect to the events in Trenton, I was on, I've been commenting to the media on it. They've come for comment, including tonight, pushing for provincial standards that the K-12 Standards Development Committee recommended 2.5 years ago. The need for provincial standards are more pressing than ever, and these horrible events prove it. Quick items. We have been asked by staff to review our terms of reference. We will be establishing a terms of reference working group. I'll be chairing it. I mentioned it in my chair's report. Anybody who'd like to be on that working group, please either identify yourself now to Leanne or let us know after. Anybody want to throw themselves into the sheer exciting joy of terms of reference? I want to make it painless. Richard, I nominate you. I volunteer you. Isn't that the term? Voluntold, right. If Richard could be included, that would be great. I saw him accepting. That was clear to me. But anybody else, we'd love it. Second, we're devoting, Rachel, I had mentioned this, we are devoting our October SEAC meeting to holding kind of a town hall, inviting families, students to come and tell us whatever they want about their issues, particularly focusing on priority areas that we're focusing on. We need a working group to plan how we're going to publicize it and how we're going to do it. Nora kindly agreed to chair it. Could we get some volunteers to serve on that working group? It's more immediate. Do we have anybody?
I see Tracy's hand up. Tracy, did you want to speak?
Yes, I'd like to join that group, please.
Okay. Anybody else?
Jordan Glass, I see.
Great.
Happy to.
Jordan, do we have anybody else? I don't see any other hands raised.
And
Trustee Arts?
And Leanne, do we have anyone else on the terms of reference group, or?
Not yet, but I just
Okay.
posted in the chat to send me an email if you want to join those.
All right. All right, great, thank you. Before we get to the staff report, are there any urgent trustee reports or association reports? If not,
Trustee Arts?
I just sent a few more links to Leanne. There's a couple of surveys open right now that members might be interested in taking. One is there's a review of alternative secondary schools. So if you don't know what they are, these are our small schools, small secondary schools across the system that serve students that really aren't coping in the regular school environment. So they have sometimes an all modified day, sometimes a small classroom setting. And sometimes a specific focus. Some of them are right now, some of them are thriving, have a good student enrollment to support adequate staffing. Some of them are not. So we're undertaking a review. So there's input on those. If you know about them, they, as I said, they tend to be accessed by students who are not thriving within a regular secondary school. So it's a really super quick survey. It takes like 2 minutes to fill it out. And then there's a larger review that's going to be happening that you can follow if you're interested. Our cell phone policy is under development. There's a parent and staff survey out right now. I know people have different perspectives on cell phones in schools, but we have heard from a lot of families that where a cell phone is, especially for an older child, is a support system for them or a support resource. So input on the cell phone policy. And the one piece that I actually didn't include in the update I sent, that Leanne sent out, was that I missed the Caring and Safe schools report came, sorry, the meeting went to midnight. Some items got pushed down. I don't know where. Okay. So the Caring and Safe Schools annual report came to committee last week, but we ran out of time, so it's going straight to board without recommendation. So I'm going to send that link to Leanne. It does, so this is the, a bunch of data, including suspensions and expulsions, disciplinary data. It does have information I think the committee members would be interested in reading on rates of suspensions for students with special education needs or identified with special education needs. So I'll send the link so you can have a look, and the board meeting that it's going to is on June 19th. So if you have comments or feedback, please send them.
Trustee Arts, I think it's actually PPC tomorrow.
Oh, it's going to PPC tomorrow? Sorry. Our meetings
great.
have been running very long. I'm going to
All
send
right,
the link.
thank you very much.
It was a late night.
Are there any other association reports anyone needs at this point? If not, I'm going to defer the minutes from our last meeting till September so we can use our time for the staff report. And Nandy, if you need more time, we can either extend the meeting or we can abridge it. You could talk about as much as you want now and we can cover the rest in September, however you'd prefer to proceed.
Well, thanks, David. I actually had sent out the leadership report as part of the mail out, so it is there. I don't think I need to go through all of it, except to say that we continue with building staff capacity at every levels to support students. And we have also, there are a number of projects in the leadership report that we had to apply actually for ministry grants in order to receive funding to do those projects. And now we're just ramping up for summer transition programs, summer school, our autism summer program, as well as ECPP summer school. And I just wanted to end off by extending, and June, recognizing that June is National Deaf Blind Awareness Month in Canada. And I just wanted to end off by saying a huge thank you on behalf of the Special Education and Inclusion Department and all TDSB staff to SEAC for your partnership this school year, and we look forward to working with you in the new school year. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Questions for staff?
And sorry, I have to correct myself. Sorry, through you, Chair.
Oh, go ahead. By the way, can I officially declare that no one needs to speak through me?
I'd like to do that, though, David. Okay.
You can talk over my head, but you don't
Okay.
have to.
Okay.
Go.
Trustee Arts, I don't think it's PPC. I think it's gone to PSSC, the new PSSC. So if we could figure this out and the link can be shared with SEAC, but I just looked up at PPC. It's not tomorrow.
Okay, so I think that's going to be the 18th.
I think you're right.
So, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Questions?
I have one question.
Go.
Or one or two questions.
Microphone.
Thank you. Just going through the leadership report, I read it earlier, and I'm just wondering, in some of the categories when you are describing things like, for example, Be the Change, students and educators came together to celebrate their work. How many students? How many educators? Can we get some numbers, and even in the area of supporting transition to high school? Professional support services receive mental health and well-being funds. how much funds? How are these being spent? All great stuff, but just trying to qualify, you know, the number of people various things are impacting, how many staff are involved, how much funding is being received, how big of an impact is this on the system? That would be, I think, really helpful to see the good work that you're doing, but to be able to say, okay, you know, they've done this great stuff and it's hit 100% of the students, or we've done this great stuff and we've only been able to cover 1% of the students, because that would give us some idea to go back to board and say, look at the great things here, but there needs to be more funding or more resources or whatever so that to help you move forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that feedback. I will share it with the professional support services staff that put in for those grants and did that. And with regards to the summer transition program, we're still receiving submissions for that, Richard. That's why it says in the fall we will provide a synopsis of various programs offered. So we will definitely do that, but I will take that feedback back to PSS. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, other questions?
No, nobody online, nobody in the room.
All right, does anybody want to move that we not adjourn? I don't hear a motion. Everybody have a good summer. Thank you all for all of your time and your dedication, and let's have a good summer, and let's get ready for some more action in the fall. Take care, everyone. Have a good time.
Good night. Stay well.
Thanks, everyone.